Hello and welcome to yet another very special live episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, January 17th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 227 days, the game against Michigan in 318 days. This didn't used to just be a live show every day, but boy, it has been an eventful week or two in the Ohio State athletics realm, and so we keep having to do these shows when news breaks, and news just broke. I'm joined by Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Marc Givler, I think, is going to be on the way in just a little bit. But Kevin, Ohio State has a new athletics director. The name sort of leaked a day or two back. It is Ross Bjork. He is coming immediately from Texas A&M. Previously had been at Ole Miss. What can you let people know about Ross Bjork?
Well, Ross Bjork is one of these names that is, as we welcome Marc into the show, that is well known in the ADing circle, currently or most recently at Texas A&M, previously at Ole Miss, has had a couple other stops, was at Western Kentucky as well. I think it's a big hire because you got to remember Texas A&M, number 7 athletic department in terms of revenue out there in the nation. We are now in a world in college athletics where you need to have people that know how to handle big budgets, big expectations, big boosters. Let's not forget that Charlie Baker, the NC2A president, came out recently with, a paper essentially on how to move NIL in-house that could be in place by as soon as like August. All of these reasons made it paramount for Ohio State, with its new president and its board of trustees, to go out and find somebody who has done all of this before. And Ross Bjork is one of the biggest names out there. I know a lot of people are going to say things about the handling of Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss, and I'm sure we can get into that. But Ohio State swung for the fences and certainly landed a big name, and now it will be up for all of us, Monday morning quarterbacks to kind of go through and make decisions of if it was the right hire or not.
And I mean, already seeing questions in the chat about whether he was the one who hired Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. No, he inherited Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. He was there when they sort of bumped Jimbo Fisher's contract after a big early season, but he was not the guy who initially hired Jimbo Fisher there. And Marc, when I sort of was getting some intel on Ross Bjork and who he is, I kept hearing about fundraising and I kept hearing about NIL. And it feels like when Kevin mentioned a history of having run in a significant size athletic department before. And there were certainly other names you heard during this process, guys who had direct Ohio State ties, who were ADs at other places in the country. It feels like if you're going to go away from the Gene Smith tree and hire someone who has no previous Ohio State ties, those fundraising bona fides, the NIL type background, it feels like that probably is playing a pretty significant role in why this decision got made.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way at this point. That was my takeaway when his name first surfaced, whenever that was, a week ago, a few days ago. He is used to handling quite a large NIL operation with what they have down there. I'm not so interested in the strategy of how A&M deployed their NIL. I'm not sure that was always the best way of allocating the resources, but that's not a decision he ultimately really makes. That's more on the collectives and kind of working with the coaching staff down there. So the fact that this guy is serious about NIL, he understands that you have to have, a pretty good war chest these days if you want to stay competitive. I think that's definitely on the positive side of things. He's definitely been at a place that, again, has a huge athletic department, has a huge budget, and has borderline insane expectations. So he'll fit right in Columbus.
Yeah, Texas A&M has definitely, the profile of the football program has risen significantly over the last decade since their move to the SEC and huge stadium expansion in the wake of Johnny Manziel. And Bjork was not there for all of that, but he was there for the latter portion of that. And the size and scope of a football program of the, in the Big Two conferences is not going to scare him. The size of the athletic department is a little different than what the Texas A&M one is. As Kevin said earlier, 7th largest budget. I think Ohio State is the largest athletic department budget in the country, but it's significantly more sports than Texas A&M had. Texas A&M, I think, I looked at this yesterday. I think, Kevin, it was 16 sports, 17 varsity sports in Ohio State. Yeah, and Ohio State is, I counted 35 on the website, but I might have missed one because I think the number is actually 36. But it's a much bigger athletic department in terms of the number of sports. So that could be a little bit of a different kind of challenge for him. But I guess Ohio State being, I think, the single biggest in terms of in number of sports offered, I don't know that you could come from anywhere and be entirely prepared to run an athletic department with as many sports as Ohio State has.
Yeah, exactly. Gene Smith, throughout his tenure, has certainly made sure everybody knows Ohio State has, and that's where I got 36. I replayed all of the times I heard Gene Smith say it. I'm pretty sure he said 36. I'm sure if I would have texted him, he would have been like 36. Let me list them off for you, because it is a big accomplishment, and Ohio State, even during COVID, did not have to cut any sports, anything like that, when there was no money coming in, really. Ross Bjork is going to be drinking from a fire hose in a lot of ways, and this is a situation of a guy that has done a lot in his ADing career in terms of his stops and the programs that he's been involved with and things of that nature. And you look at Ohio State, and it seems like a new facility is being built every time we're on athletic campus. I mean, just recently with the lacrosse stadium, obviously you have the Shoemaker Center, you have Cavelli. I mean, a lot of things have been built under the watch of Gene Smith, even here in the last couple of years. And now you bring in Ross Bjork, who I think is going to be really well regarded when it comes to speaking to boosters and speaking to people for the donations and the grease that really keeps an athletic department running, and that grease is called money.
And he's got a little bit of a time to transition into this job, because he doesn't officially take over as the athletic director until July 1st. That's when Gene Smith officially retires. So it's a little bit of a transitional period. But this is kind of a transitional period for the whole institution, because Ted Carter, the new president of the university, just took over on January 1st. So, Ryan Day, as the head football coach, is going to have a new boss, a new athletic director on July 1st. His boss has a new boss, just started on January 1st. And the sports, the college sports world itself is in a little bit of a transitional thing right now with what is the future of NIL going to look like? Because the NCAA has talked about, hey, changes could be on the way. This could be much more of an in-house thing rather than sort of an arm length thing, or at least on paper, an arm length thing with these collectives. This feels like, I know he knows what job he's taking, Marc, but I don't know that anyone in college sports really knows what they're signing up for 6 months out.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting thing for me. Look, we've talked about this on our site for 2 years now. The next step is going to be money flowing directly from the schools to the players. How that looks, what the framework of that is all going to be sorted out. And I think August sounds tremendous. Is it going to be, are we going to get the system we all want in August? I doubt it. Never seems to move that quickly. But the amount of money that they had raised through NIL and just everything else, these guys basically have two jobs at this point. You're a fundraiser, and you occasionally need to hire a coach. And if you can nail both of those things, the rest of the stuff will fall into place. And if you nail the coach part, you don't have to do it very much. So those are going to be two things. Here's kind of an elephant in the room that I'll be interested to kind of see. He probably won't address it now. It's not the way you would want to start your tenure. It's more something that may have to be addressed once we start talking about money flowing directly to players. Is how is Ohio State at that point going to keep 36 sports? And quite frankly, I think a lot of the timing on Gene Smith's retirement is based a little bit on that, just because Gene's big legacy at Ohio State is going to be what he did for the non-rev sports. I mean, that's going to be his big legacy that he leaves Ohio State with. And there's going to be some really tough decisions on that front once the schools start handling the money and funneling that to the athletes. There could be some tough decisions on that part, on how how that's balanced. Do they have to cut sports? Do they have to cut a few? And I don't think Gene wanted any part of that discussion. So I think this is timing up well again from a transitional standpoint of someone who doesn't have this legacy of, doubling Ohio State's number of sports or whatever it's been under Gene Smith, and doesn't have to like kind of have the questions of, oh, do I have to start like dismantling my own legacy here? So I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going to take place 6 to 8 months from now.
It feels a little bit like when Jim Delaney slid out the side door right before COVID. You didn't know he was getting out right while the getting was good, but oh boy, did he get out right while the getting was good. Gene Smith, he has sort of ridden out what has already been sort of a tumultuous few years in the college sports realm. I'm sure he's not going to be devastated to hand the reins off to someone else, to Ross Bjork, now that we know officially, to have to deal with all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there is a lot that you sort of have to balance now, because if you go back, I mean, Gene Smith's legacy in terms of the non-rev sports, boy, have they been dominant in some of the non-rev sports. Men's tennis, one of the best programs in the nation, just built a brand new facility a couple of years ago named for Ty Tucker, the long time head coach of that program. The women's hockey program won a national championship a year or so back, dominant number one again in the country. They are fundraising. They're working on building a new rink for that program. But now, not only are you looking at building, maintaining the sports that you have and potentially building new facilities, now you got the NIL piece. And the money can only go, there is a finite amount of money. It is a significant amount of money when you're Ohio State, but it is a finite amount of money. And so you have the sports you're maintaining and the cost of those, the facilities you're maintaining and the cost of those. They're still, I think, paying off some of the renovation work they did at the Horseshoe over the years. There's, what work needs to be done on the Schottenstein Center. That's now 20-something years old. Do they need to start looking at, money there? They just built a new basketball practice facility there a couple of years ago. They have done a ton of capital work there, but now you're dividing that pie potentially another little way. That just, Kevin, feels like this is going to be, you as the new athletic director are going to get pulled in a lot of different directions, because everyone is going to have their own view of what's the most important thing and what do you have to do. And those views are not all going to align.
Right. You're right in saying there's a finite amount of money. I mean, obviously, we'll just ask for a little bit more. It doesn't mean you're going to get a little bit more, and you're trying to sit there and feed the mouths at the top of the chain with football and basketball, both men's and women's, and where things may go there. And you do wonder what's going to happen to some of the Olympic sports. I mean, I've finally trained myself not to say non-rev. Oh, that's offensive. No, it's Olympic sports. Even if it's not featured in the Olympics, that is what we have to say for the sports that do not pay for themselves in terms of revenue, that are revenue negative, if you will. So Ross Bjork is going to come in and have to make a lot of decisions there. Ross Bjork's going to walk in with all sorts of decisions coming in. And I think that coaches are going to feel some pressures. I mean, whether or not we're talking about Olympic sports or we're even talking about guys at the top, because Ross Bjork was not the AD that hired Chris Holtman or Kevin McGuff or Ryan Day. Ted Carter was not the president involved in the hiring of any of these guys. So I think there's going to be an immense amount of pressure felt by everybody, because the whole leadership structure has changed just with the wave of a wand at this point. So it's a real interesting time to try and figure out what the Ohio State athletic department is going to look like in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And I don't think any of us really have a good idea. I don't think that Ross Bjork has an idea. I don't think that outgoing AD Gene Smith knows what it's going to look like in 10 years, because, where we were sitting just now with football, if you would have told me this is where we were going to be 5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. So, change is the only thing that we can count upon.
And, what's next for college football and for college sports on the whole is, as Kevin said, sort of an open question at this point, because you've had the NCAA president sort of floating the idea of, maybe your school's paying players directly, and there's going to be, $30,000 a year for a certain number of athletes, and you got to pay all of your athletes. And, that could end up with a split of FBS into the haves and have-nots even more than it already is. that could be coming. Is that coming in 2 years? Is that coming in 5 years? Is that coming in 10 years? We don't know. They don't know either. This is all just sort of a little bit of a work in progress. You mentioned some of the immediate decisions that Ross Bjork may have to make when he gets to Columbus. The future of the Ohio State basketball program is certainly one that's at least a little bit up in the air right now. Several folks in the comments would like Ross Bjork to closely examine the future of the Ohio State men's basketball program. Chris Holtman, with 4 years left on his deal, $3.5 million per year after this year. And, Marc, I know this is one of those things where it feels like they're sort of lost in the wilderness at this point, where it's a little bit Groundhog Day, where you get to January and then the wheels fall off the wagon. And I think that's part of the conversation. But another part of the conversation is the conversation that we had earlier about there is a finite amount of money. And just because you're mad about Ohio State basketball right now does not mean that next November you will still be, if Ohio State is trailing Michigan in the third quarter, are you going to be okay with, well, they didn't bring in X player or bring back X player because of NIL? Are you going to be okay with that because you got a change in the basketball program? Or, there is a finite amount of money here, and, the donor money can either go to the collectives or whatever is funding NIL at that point, or they can go to coach buyouts, or they can go to new facilities. Are you going to be happy that they built a new facility for the fill-in-the-blank team or fired the coach of the fill-in-the-blank team if that is meaning that, hey, they can't bring back 3 football players next year? That's the kind of decisions that people, I think, are going to be having to be forced to face now.
Yeah, and I know the Ohio State fans' answer to that is football, football, football. But I think they're also going to want to kind of have their cake and eat it too on that if the basketball program continues to trend in the direction it's trending right now. So that's going to be a big challenge. I actually think if you're Chris Holtman, this may be somewhat helpful to you that they've done this now, because the most realistic outcome right now is that Bjork's going to let this season play out and probably take a fresh pair of eyes on the situation, which may buy Holtman some time. Whereas if this had continued, down the road and Gene is locked in long-term, who knows? Maybe that's a shorter leash for Holtman. So we'll see. It's gonna be interesting. I think the Ohio State, this isn't the Ohio State basketball show necessarily, but there's a lot of issues with the program right now. You can talk about coaching. You can talk about, the struggles in final minutes, and are you recruiting the right mentality in terms of recruits? You're recruiting highly ranked guys. Are you recruiting enough toughness? Does your building need to be brought to the ground and rebuilt at half the size? I mean, there's a lot of things we could get into on that, but there's no doubt, a fresh pair of eyes is going to make things a little bit unpredictable. But at the end of the day, I don't think they'll allow this to continue too long. And I do think if this continues to slip, we continue to see this every winter, and this doesn't get turned around this year, I think Bjork has a chance to kind of send a message to whoever it might be in the athletic department and the fan base, of course, but, other coaches who are perceived to be underperforming, like, hey, new sheriff in town, I'm bringing in my people if you guys aren't going to win.
Well, and that's one of those things that you typically will see with a leadership turnover. And remember, new university president and new athletic director, you typically, guys, when they come in, want to leave their mark on the program and want to bring in their own people and have their own vision for what the program should be and what expectations should be and what the areas of focus should be. And that can lead to a little bit of uncertainty for guys who, maybe it makes is this a coaching change that needs to be made? Maybe that pushes a few of those over the edge. And there are coaches at Ohio State who I think are absolutely, I think Nadine Muzzerall can coach the women's hockey team as long as she wants to, because boy, oh boy, I don't think there's a better coach in America in maybe any sport than she is, considering where that program was when she came in. But I think that, you've got Kevin McGuff is doing a very good job with the women's basketball program. I don't think there's any concern there. I think there are other programs where sometimes you want to come in and make a change and you're just sort of looking for an excuse to make a change. So this feels like you could have some turnover, but if you want to build a new basketball arena, well, paying a bunch of coaching buyouts, well, that's a good way to spend a bunch of money that you then don't have to spend on the basketball arena. So this just feels, Kevin, like a really interesting time. And if you are coming in as Ross Bjork, I kind of am on Marc's side here. You come in and you maybe sort of take stock of stuff, and you don't just walk in the first day and just point at him and say you're fired. You don't Vince McMahon this. You maybe take some time and take stock of the situation and make sure you really understand the lay of the land before you start making big changes.
I don't know which year Ohio State hired its first AD. I don't think like in 1870 it had an AD, but this is only Ohio State's 9th athletic director. Gene Smith was the 3rd longest tenured AD in program history, which means, and he was here, 18 years, something like that? I mean, he was here a long, long time. So we have gone through a lot of university president changes. I mean, Dr. Christina Johnson was at Ohio State for a hiccup, it feels like. But we've not gone through a lot of AD changes. In fact, I know, Gene Smith, Andy Geiger, and then and then his predecessor, I think, was there right at the beginning of my collegiate career, maybe even a little bit before that. We don't see a lot of AD changes. So we don't have, in terms of Ohio State, a ton of precedent. Now, we do see a lot of musical chairs out there for other programs changing ADs like it changes its socks. But we don't have the playbook per se for Ohio State of how it's going to handle that. And I think that's what makes this so intriguing. And the other thing too, and I'll talk about the Huddle board over at BuckeyeHuddle.com, a place that everybody should be a member of. Why the hell aren't you already? Is people have really taken to, thumbs up or thumbs down even before the hire was officially made, when Pete Thamel of ESPN.com came out and said, this is the way it looks like it's going. And I was like, I understand people making these type of comments about coaches, but making it about the AD, wow, this is some 3D chess.
And let me just run you through the list of Ohio State athletic directors. Colin Gay of the Dispatch put a list together. Thank you, Colin. A lot of familiar names on here. If you were familiar with buildings on campus at Ohio State or former buildings on campus at Ohio State, Lynn St. John, the first athletic director at Ohio State, 1912 to 1947. How's that for a tenure? And then you get your name on the basketball arena, and then everyone calls you St. John's. Not quite. Lynn St. John. And then Richard Larkins, former, that used to be the Larkins Hall, used to be where the pool was at Ohio State before they built the new RPAC. Yeah. 1947 to 1970. So 1912 to 1970, 2 athletic directors at Ohio State. It was the graveyard of coaches. It was the exact opposite of that in terms of athletic directors. Edward Weaver, 1970 to 1977, Hugh Hindman, 1977 to 1984, Richard Bay, 1984 to 1987. He resigned. You may remember him. He was the one who resigned when Ed Jennings fired Earl Bruce. Jim Jones, not the guy from Guyana, the athletic director, 1987 to 1994. Andy Geiger, 1994 to 2005. And then Gene Smith since 2005. So, incredible stability there in that position. But I think that's also maybe, Marc, a reflection of this is kind of the top of the food chain. Once you get there, there's nowhere else to go unless you want to, you want to go be the commissioner of the Big Ten. Maybe you could do that. Or, there was for a long time speculation that Gene Smith might go be the commissioner of whatever replaced the NCAA. Gene Smith was asked at a press conference about that, if he had any interest in that. And he looked over at his wife, Sheila, who was sitting in the corner of the room. And she said, and I quote, "Hell no." So Gene Smith, that is not Gene Smith's future, but it does feel like this is sort of the pinnacle of athletic administration, at least in terms of college in the U.S. And that's maybe part of why there's so much stability there.
Yeah, it's not that much unlike the head football coaching position. You either get fired, which is even tougher to do as an AD than a coach, or you retire, or and there's not much else to do once you've reached that level. So, I think we've had 4 head football coaches since like 1988. So the AD, I think same number or very close to it. So it's not a, stepping stone job by any stretch of the imagination. Your next step from Ohio State athletic director or Ohio State head football coach is likely like the NFL or being in some type of a front office role in the NFL. It's not a commissioner type of role. It's not a jumping for another AD job. So you hire these guys with the intention of them being here for more than a decade. And so these guys, even more so than the coaches, these guys can really kind of put their imprint on the athletic department. By the time he leaves, I'm sure he'll have made numerous coaching hires that will impact the trajectory of this athletic department. So, these are important decisions. When you talk about, your athletic director, it's a very, very important decision, and you have to be mindful of the changing landscape of college athletics. You're probably not going to hire the same type of person today that you hired, even when you hired Gene Smith, certainly when you hired Andy Geiger. So they've clearly made it a fundraising NIL focus here. And, that's fine. I think that's probably the way to go. And now we have to see, okay, how does he handle his staff? Because again, fundraising 1A and 1B is coaching decisions. So, and he's got some big ones to make. He'll need to obviously decide on basketball here pretty soon. And quite frankly, I mean, we're going to be having a conversation in a year or two on Ryan Day, good or bad, so that'll be another thing to watch as well.
Well, it's interesting that it feels like this is a reflection of how the athletic department or athletic director job has changed. And you sort of have that same conversation when you look at who the conference commissioners are. And it went from, who was the AD at one of the schools in that league, and the former Northwestern AD, Jim Phillips, just took the ACC job. But then you had Kevin Warren, who was more of an attorney background, take the Big Ten job. And then you had Tony Petiti take the Big Ten job and a little bit more of a entertainment and TV broadcast kind of background. The responsibilities of the position are changing. So the type of person you're looking for is kind of changing. We have a bunch of interesting questions. Some of them are a little less on topic. So before we completely wrap things up, and we'll get to some of those questions in a minute, before we kind of wrap things up on the Ross Bjork thing, I know, Kevin, you have a little bit of a family tie to Ole Miss, so you have maybe a little more insight into Ross Bjork's time at Ole Miss, because I think there's been a lot of people who've looked at this and gone, Jimbo Fisher, strike one, and Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss, strike two. You, I think, maybe have a little bit of a different perspective on this than other folks. So just, share a little bit about your thoughts and what you know about those situations, because I think that is, that's part of this conversation in terms of who Ohio State's hiring.
Right. And my wife graduated. She got her bachelor's from Ole Miss. So that means I get to watch more Ole Miss than I ever really anticipated. And we don't get to watch a lot of games together because of the job. And when Ole Miss is playing, generally Ohio State's playing, or at least on the same days. But I certainly watched Bjork, and there was the consideration of how the whole Hugh Freeze dalliances scandal went, and Bjork probably could have handled it a little bit better. But we're also talking about something a long time ago, and I know early in my professional career, there were certainly, when I was sitting at the in the control room producing live television, there are things that I probably would like to have over again. And, I don't know what his view is going to be of that. And then we go to A&M, and he was not the guy who hired Jimbo Fisher, but he did give that extension. But ask Mel Tucker what happens when a thirsty program gets a little taste of success, and then everybody's worried that their coach is going to go away. You offer them an extension, a giant extension with all sorts of zeros on it and very little assurances for the school. That's just what happens. And we know that you pass the hat around to your rich donors, and that's where that money comes from. It's not taking food out of the dining halls. No, your son or daughter is not going to starve in college because an AD rushed into an extension because that's what market forces said needed to happen. I think in my observations of Bjork through these couple of stops, I think that I think it's a good move. And I talked to a couple of people who cover A&M, and they generally had positive things to say about Bjork too, and that he's a tremendous speaker, and that he's tremendous at raising money, and that people will generally like him, and that there's still maybe some people around A&M that are salty toward Jimbo and have put a little bit of that in Bjork's hat. But I think anybody who really knows what's going on understands that he inherited Jimbo, and he made the move that pretty much anybody else is going to do. You're going to split aces and eights, and he had to give Jimbo an extension at that time, because that's what market forces really said needed to be done.
The college sports coaching market, especially the high level college football coaching market, is one of those sort of inherently just insane markets where you can either spend a ludicrous amount of money and deal with the fact that the industry standard is a guaranteed buyout of basically 100% or close to it of the remaining amount of your contract, and the amount of money that's getting thrown around on high level coaches is ludicrous. And I think the numbers on those might change a little bit. I mean, this is some of the same conversation that we're having in terms of, well, you've got to make a facilities decision versus a cutting sports decision versus the money only goes so far and there's only so much of it. And that may potentially change what the college coaching market looks like financially as well. So that'll all be stuff that Ross Bjork has to deal with when he takes over the Ohio State position. We've got a couple questions I wanted to get through real quickly. Jimmy wants to know, will Bjork be starting before July 1st, or is he going to wait till Smith is fully out of the role? And the announcement from Ohio State said he will begin his tenure as athletics director at Ohio State on July 1st, 2024. So, maybe he'll come and hang out in Columbus a little bit and shadow Gene Smith a little. But July 1st is one of those times when that's typically a pretty quiet time in the college sports world, as you have the spring sports are done in about May. You get, College World Series and stuff will drift into June, but July is typically one of the quietest months. That's one of the months where college football coaches will take a vacation because they can get away for a few weeks. So that's one of the reasons. It's also the start of the fiscal year for a lot of folks. So that's why that would be a time that that transition gets made. Adam Baker wants to know, will the new AD cut some of our 36 sports? Hope not. I mean, we talked about that earlier, Kevin, but this feels like with as much uncertainty as there is on so many fronts, and what is the monetary model going to look like? It feels like that's maybe more on the table potentially in the next 5 to 10 years than it would have been the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be more difficult. And the thing is, we talk about cutting sports, let's not forget about Title IX and everything that Title IX means. What is Title IX going to factor into with NIL? And if there's direct payments from the university, I mean, are we talking, do they attempt to go dollar for dollar? There's no way that you can do that. But I mean, in terms of what the monies are going to be, but I don't know, Adam. I wish I had a better answer for you. The skeptic in me believes that it's going to be really hard come 2030 to have 36 athletic program or have 36 teams in your program. But Ohio State has gone to such great lengths. But granted, that is Gene Smith's legacy. Ohio State has gone to such great lengths to keep that size athletic department. Time will tell.
And a lot of those programs will have endowed scholarships, and the scholarships can be part of, one of the big expenses. So if you have an endowed scholarship, and I mean, pick a team, pistol team, rowing team, whatever you want to pick, if there are endowed scholarships for that, maybe that helps underwrite the cost, and you can get, is there some rich person who really enjoys that sport and wants to sort of help underwrite that sport? I always think of Bill Davis, who was a big supporter of Ohio State baseball, and Bill Davis Stadium is named after him. And if you have someone who is, has the money to help kind of underwrite that stuff, maybe that makes keeping whatever sport you want to talk about viable longer, makes that a real possibility when otherwise it might not be. We do have a super chat from David Greenshield. Did Cooper have dirt on Geiger and Jones? We got Tress for 10 years, Meyer for 7, and Cooper for 13. I think, Marc, this is someone who doesn't remember exactly how close John Cooper got to getting fired, like 1992. The famous E. Gordon Gee, the tie is one of the best wins in history because they didn't have to fire him. And then, once you got through that, they were pretty solid through the mid 90s, won some Big Ten championships. The bar back then was not where the bar is now. And so an 11-2 season that felt like a disaster this year in 1995, that was a pretty good season.
Yeah, I think one thing that plays a big role into a coach's longevity is how well the guy before him did, and what he's inheriting and why he's taking over. Is he taking over because the last guy got fired, or is he taking over because the last guy just didn't want to coach anymore and is leaving him, a top program, kind of like Urban left Day, and unfortunately it wasn't Tressel's choice to retire, but Tressel left Urban a program that was in better shape than what he had found it in. So Earl Bruce did not leave Ohio State in better shape than what Woody Hayes left it in. And I think that bought him maybe some extra time. We're also in a different landscape now. Back then you got 3 or 4 years, almost no matter what. You got your first, 4-year cycle. And so that's not the case anymore, but it's kind of a different sign of the times as well. But I just think, if you look at what even Tressel inherited, I think every coach, including John Cooper, I think every coach in the last, 35, 30, whatever it is, the last 4 coaches, they've all less, or the previous 3, I guess we're not counting Ryan Day, but those 3 coaches, I think all left Ohio State in better shape than where they found it. And so I think that's really the biggest thing, and why Cooper was able to kind of last a little bit longer and just seem to have the right good year at the right time.
Yeah. Tressel left. I mean, I'm not here to bring down the tone of the show, but Tressel had some controversy hanging around him. Meyer had some controversy hanging around him. And whereas Meyer kind of decided, okay, I'm going to up and say this Rose Bowl against Washington is my last game, he was not without his own, controversy that was going on, and the suspension he served and everything else. I mean, the controversy around Cooper was he couldn't beat Michigan. He couldn't beat the SEC in a bowl game. Hell, he couldn't beat Illinois. Cooper left really because the clock ran out on him. They could not get over the hump, and that was that. That's why he left, and they bring in Jim Tressel. I mean, if Jim Tressel does not have that whole Tat 5 situation, how much longer does he coach? I'll tell you one thing that probably doesn't happen. Urban Meyer probably never ends up at Ohio State because it changes timelines, and where things intersect, the timing probably never matches up. So, I'm taking a much more serious and philosophical look at this than probably what David Greenshield intended with his super chat, and we thank you for the super chat. But, as I was sitting here listening to Marc talk, that's kind of where my mind wandered to.
All right. And because we have Marc on the show, we have a bunch of recruiting questions and transfer portal questions. So let's hit a couple real quick. Marc, what's the latest on Caleb Downs?
The latest is there is no latest. He's not in the transfer portal unless he's entered in the last few minutes while I haven't been paying attention. I think the longer this goes, I think the worse this gets for Ohio State in terms of entering the portal. I think if you're getting an emotional decision of, I'm so angry that Nick Saban's gone and what am I going to do? And you'd like him to get in the portal, immediately. And that hasn't happened. I think the longer this drags, obviously, the worse it gets for Ohio State. I don't love where things are trending right now, but we'll see. Portals are odd. He could, have an epiphany tomorrow and be like, nope, I'm out. So, but right now I don't like the tone. I think we probably should have heard something by now more definitive than, oh yeah, he's thinking about it.
Yeah, that Daz Ricks, it took him, Tom's muted, it took Daz Ricks, like from the time that the story started to come out to when he ended up in the portal, it took 4 or 5 days. I just saw another corner from Alabama just go into the portal, I think today. Everybody's going to operate on their own timeline. I know everybody got very excited about the potential of Caleb Downs ending up at Ohio State, and you take him 11 out of 10 times. There's no doubt whatsoever you make that happen, but I will say this, and this is, Kevin's just foaming the runway. Kevin's just covering his ass here, but this one's a luxury get. This one is a luxury get. It absolutely makes Ohio State better. Absolutely makes Ohio State better, but it is a luxury get. But I also really like Malik Hartford too.
I like the Kevin is foaming the runway. That could go so many different directions. So I'm glad we're talking about firefighting. I think RK says, saw a picture of Corey Dennis on the road with Hartline and Bailey today. Does that mean he's going to stay on the staff? I don't know that anyone on the offensive staff is 100% locked in for 2024 other than Brian Hartline. You know, that Football Scoop report that came out a week and a half ago said when they bring in a new offensive coordinator, the new offensive coordinator will have the opportunity to make changes as he sees fit on the offensive side of the ball. Well, they don't have a new offensive coordinator yet. So I think that's, you know, the staff is what the staff is right now. James Laurinaitis is on the road right now because they only have 9 full-time assistants. So James Laurinaitis can be the 10th. That does not mean that James Laurinaitis is 100% guaranteed to be one of those 10 countable coaches next year. That just means that's what it is right now. So I don't think I would make any long-term decisions based on that. Mika Hanna says, I want Zahir Mathis, London Merritt, Justin Hill, Cedric Burks, and Brandon Caesar, along with a couple big DTs in 2025. Mark, is Mika going to be happy with the 2025 Ohio State defensive line recruiting class?
Yeah, I think that's a good list. Obviously Mathis is committed. I think they're going to get Hill. I certainly think they'll get Caesar, as long as there's a spot for him. And I tend to think he might grow into a tackle. I'm not sure if he'll stay on the edge or not, so that'll be kind of an interesting one to watch. And they're in great shape with London Merritt. They've had him up, feels like 8 times by now. But, I mean, really, I think it's been 4 or 5. He's been up to Ohio State. And so I think they're in good shape there. They haven't offered Cedric Works, but that's one I think if they jump in the mix here in the next couple months, and with he's got a good friendship with Dorian Brew, who used to be at Clayton Northmont as well. So I think that certainly you would expect them to be able to land him if they offer him. So it's setting up nicely this year because they're not having to go find 3 kids from Florida or Texas or Georgia. They've got Mathis is a PA kid. They've done an amazing job in PA over the years, especially in the Philadelphia area. You've got a guy like Hill in state. You've got Caesar in state. You've got Works in state. There's some guys in Illinois they're recruiting. This doesn't seem like we got to go get the 5-star from California and the 5-star from Texas and the 5-star from Georgia and hope we can get all of them in NIL and geography and everything else. This feels like a good setup to go get 6 guys that you like and that aren't going to have maybe as much drama as the last couple of years, but we'll see.
All right. And speaking of maybe not as much drama as we've seen in the past, Mark, is Dominic Kirk going to be a Buckeye?
Yeah, I do believe so. And again, as I've kind of talked about before, I think there's 2 things right now. Obviously, USC is not giving up, and they're hoping to get him out there before things go down to back to the dead period or whatever before they got to sign it here in February. But USC is still trying. And then we haven't seen – this is the thing I wasn't sure about, and we haven't really seen much there yet, is what does Kalen DeBoer to Alabama mean? Kalen DeBoer obviously took Dominic Kirk's commitment at Washington. Bama's putting a staff together. They're trying to figure that stuff out. Do they try and make a late push? But it just feels like the home state school is going to be able to get this one done.
All right, how about one for Kevin here? Comment is if Ross Bjork is an NIL and donation guy, then I'm happy we got the best guy. Is that what makes an athletic director the best guy right now? Is that the main focus for an athletic director in 2024?
I think so. You better be able to run your program and make sure that you know what's going on with each program. I was chastised on the huddle message board for not understanding leadership 101 and that the AD is responsible for every little single action. So if that poster's on here, we can continue to fight over that one. But you need to know what's happening with all of that. But you got to bring in the money. That is the grease that keeps the wheels moving at this point. And I still truly believe that if we get to the point that Charlie Baker was talking about and NIL comes in-house, you need to have somebody who understands that aspect. I think you might even see some programs start to go a little bit outside of the AD world. And, maybe do you split the role in some ways? I don't know. I mean, we've also seen conferences go a little bit against the norm and in terms of hiring their commissioners, and it's not been 100% working there. I mean, Larry Scott would be the first example of that from the largely defunct Pac-12. But to Media Shed's point, I think that this is a really good hire. It may take some people a little bit longer to get to that point than others, and that's fine. But the first time that Ross Bjork screws up, we'll all chime in unison. We got the wrong guy.
Yeah, and you're never going to get 100% of stuff right. And Gene Smith, I think, has broadly had a very, very successful tenure. But there's certainly stuff you can point to in his tenure that you'd maybe do a different way if you had it to do all over again. So yeah, you're never going to bat 1,000, but if your batting average is high enough, you can be pretty successful at Ohio State. We have a few in a row, just some hopefully quickies for Marc, and then want to end on a question about an entirely different Big Ten team. For Mickey Hanna, Marc, does Ohio State offer Quentin Simmons? I hope so.
I would. I'm not sure. He's one of about 5 class of 2025 receivers that from Ohio that Brian Hartline's evaluating right now. What I think is going to happen here, and yes, they're going to continue to go after 5-star Jamie French from Florida. There's other guys, they're going to recruit Texas and California. They're going to do all that. But it's a deep year in Ohio for receivers, and I think ultimately it's going to make sense to grab one from Ohio. And Hartline's, I think, in the process right now of figuring out, okay, is it Quentin Simmons? Is it Jackson Wiley? Is it Preston Bowman from Pickerington North? I mean, and Bowman will be on campus this weekend. So I think that's the holdup right now is like, I think they know like, hey, we can't take like 3 of these guys. We probably can't even take 2 of these guys, but we really should take one of these guys, especially with the portal, and the Ohio guys tend to stick a little longer. They tend to have a little more patience. So that's where I think things are at right now. I personally love Quentin Simmons, just electric speed. And wouldn't it be nice to have a scary kick returner again? I mean, it feels like it's been like 20 years.
Is that legal? I thought that was against the rules. Is that not a thing? Is that a thing you can still do? I had no idea. Mellow number 7 says, "What's up, Mr. Givler? Does Ohio State land Mason Short?"
Yeah, I think I've been fairly positive with my answers so far. I'm going to need to see that to believe it. I think geography is going to be a huge factor there. I think Georgia is in the driver's seat now. But I'll try and protect the identities here, but we saw Mason down at the Atlanta Under Armour camp last year around this time. So we'll be back at that event, I guess, next month. Yes. I had a chance to kind of talk to someone who had a lot of influence over Mason's decision. And I was just, at the time he was uncommitted, and, I think they were hoping to get him back for the spring game. I think he had even mentioned something about returning to Ohio State for the spring game last year. And I said, "Hey, you guys coming back for the spring game?" And they said, "Oh gosh, no, it's just too far." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well," that kind of alerted me. Like, I think people were hoping they would get him the first time around. Like, hey, he's not going to Ohio State. I mean, if getting up to the spring game is like a total bulk, like distance, geography, it's just way too far to go. I don't know. I don't think Columbus has, I haven't followed like tectonic plate movement lately, but I don't think that Columbus has moved a whole lot closer to Georgia, to Augusta, Georgia, or I guess he's in Evans, right? Technically, it's all Augusta to me, but yeah, I would be surprised.
All right. And then one last one for Marc. Why did Juju reclassify? That would be Juju Lewis, who is now a 2025 quarterback, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And we had talked about that a lot on the site. And I know you're on there, Brian. So I don't know if you had seen anything of our discussion before. We had talked about kind of a while back that this was probably going to happen. And then it kind of like went away for like 3 or 4 months. And He visits Ohio State even after St. Clair committed. And you're like, oh, well, maybe he's going to stay in 26, or else why would he visit Ohio State when they have already got their 2025 quarterback? But it looks like after his kind of period of looking around, he's looked at Alabama, and they've had the coaching change there. And, Ohio State's got their 25 guy and may have their 26 guy very soon. So stay tuned for that. It feels like he's just ready with USC kind of being in a really weird spot at quarterback. Maybe this is his way of getting out there earlier. And obviously, the NIL thing is important too. You're starting your clock toward eligibility for the NFL draft a year early. You're also getting, there's no other way to put it. You're getting a paycheck a year earlier. I mean, that's all. I mean, and the quarterbacks right now of his caliber are commanding low seven figures in NIL money. So you're basically becoming a millionaire a year earlier is basically what he's doing.
All right. And speaking of people trying to get a paycheck, we got to talk about Jim Harbaugh. Report out of Dan Wetzel today that Jim Harbaugh was looking. There's a little bit of a disconnect between Jim Harbaugh and Michigan. And one of the big ones is Jim Harbaugh wants immunity from, being punished for anything that may have happened in the past related to two existing NCAA investigations. Tony Gerderman and I did about a half an hour on this on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. So I will sit this one out. I have already said my piece. You can find that on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. Kevin, Chris wants to know, what's your take on what's being reported that Harbaugh is trying to get an exemption put in his contract that they won't fire him if they get sanctioned?
Why do you need immunity if you're completely innocent? I'm not sure. Didn't Jim Harbaugh announce on the podium, and I turned it off in disgust before we got to this point, but didn't he announce on the podium that they were completely innocent and, neener doo-doo, stick your head in poo-poo or something? I don't know. I mean, it was I don't understand why he would need all of these things. It really feels to me like Michigan is probably leaking some of this stuff just to put the wheels in motion for when Jim Harbaugh takes the LA Chargers job. And well, we couldn't reason with the guy. I mean, it'll be interesting how quickly feelings change up there, whether or not it's April 2024, whenever the NC2A at least put some things on paper in a notice of allegations, however that may work out. But my biggest takeaway is that I don't need a presidential pardon when I haven't done anything wrong. So I don't know why he's trying to get this worked into the contract when it's just a cheeseburger, man. It's just a cheeseburger.
I was informed on Tuesday or Monday night that it was cheeseburgers, etc. So it could go past cheeseburgers,
bacon,
but we have no specifics, Kevin. It's just impossible to say. It's maybe, I don't know.
Actually, no.
Maybe was the ketchup spicy? I don't know. We don't know. It's just too soon to say. The other part of that report, in addition to Harbaugh wanting immunity for all of the things that didn't happen, was Jim Harbaugh wanting the contract to delay the provision where his buyout for an NFL team jumped from $1.5 million to $4 million a year. We just wanted to delay that for a month. Marc, I can't think of a single reason why he would want to delay his buyout for the NFL going up by $2.5 million for 30 days. Can you come up with any reason? Because I know I've been repeatedly assured that he wants to stay at Michigan, and that's what he really wants, and that's the only thing he wants. Can you come up with any possible explanation for that?
I think for about 3 years now, it's been "please hire me, NFL" is what I think it's been. I think that's been the line there. And he didn't have the juice to get an NFL job a couple of years ago. Does he have the juice now? Are there better options out there? I don't know. Did he pick the wrong year with Bill Belichick on the market and Mike Vrabel on the market, and Lord knows what's happening with Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh right now, and rumors of them even maybe trading Mike Tomlin. I mean, it just it sounds like a guy who's tried everything to get to the NFL and just hasn't been able to get it to work yet. And so I know the contract extension's been on the desk for months now, and it's coming. It's right there. Everyone's on the same page here, but it just doesn't feel like that's really true.
Well, also, there's the thing in the contract too about Ward Manuel isn't going to be the one that is like the arbiter of his future. If anything happens, it's going to be a 3-man panel of Jay Harbaugh, a Booger, and some guy down the street. I mean, it's
Connor Stallions,
right? Who will never have to pay for a drink up in Michigan as long as he's repairing vacuums. It's crazy. I don't understand all this, but I've been told that the contract's coming. The contract's coming. It's coming, and it's going to be fantastic. And with all of these, with all of these stipulations and asks and everything in there, I think I know how this one ends. But yes, over the last 3 years, the only way that Harbaugh was getting to the NFL was with a ticket.
Well, we have had plenty of people in our comments telling us on all these various live shows, Michigan fans telling us that we don't know what we're talking about. And actually, secretly, Ryan Day is going to end up in prison when all of this ends because of RICO or, secretly, the actual story here is a private investigation firm. I will invite everyone to read the Dan Wetzel story and compare what we have been saying for several months with what a number of very prominent Michigan outlets have been saying for several months. And you tell me which one maybe might lead to some of the requests in the Dan Wetzel article being things that Jim Harbaugh is publicly asking for. I mean, just think about it. Think about it. Review the facts and evidence and consider who might be, have some sense of what's going on here. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. We want to thank you guys all for joining us for this very special live episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning. If you want to see more from Kevin and Tony and Marc and Ross and Devin and Mickey and Justin and me, well, you can find us all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We are all covering the team, covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, making you a smarter football fan, lots of transfer portal news, some coaching staff news potentially coming soon, much, much more. We'll say very, very, very active community. Boy, there's been a lot to talk about on the Huddle Board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. We would love to see you there at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And of course, there's undoubtedly going to be more news coming soon on the Buckeye football program and who knows, maybe the Buckeye basketball program or whatever else. And you can find that all at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle whenever it happens. We generally are pretty good about getting on the air for you pretty quick to break down what we know, what we've heard, what we've learned, and much, much more. So make sure you're subscribed there. And yes, hit that thumbs up, as Kevin has very, very wisely typed in the chat. Hit that thumbs up if you're watching this or any of our videos at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.